things. One is what it is to be a homesteader, and two is to develop a homestead. There's a difference there. I think homesteading, or being a homesteader rather, is more of a mindset. It's an attitude of self-sufficiency, a desire to do things, to be more self-sufficient. You're a learner. You're going to learn new skills, develop knowledge. You're going to be a doer. You're going to start doing things. You're going to start practicing skills. But now to develop an actual homestead, it takes action. There actually has to be something there. Not every home is a homestead. It has to be functioning in a way that makes it a homestead. So we're going to talk about first what makes it a homestead, and then we're going to get into a few of the things you can do to connect those dots to be a homestead. And I've put together a few diagrams, and what I want to look at today, or this evening rather, is it's a wagon wheel diagram that I've put together, and I think it lays out a good diagram, I guess is the word I'm looking for, of what being a homestead is and how we would connect that. And I'll just go ahead and show you the wheel here. What you have here is the wheel around, and we have homestead in the middle. Okay, but you notice there's nothing connecting, no spokes connecting that hub, that center, to the outer rim. The outer rim is representing what I think makes a homestead functionable, and that is you're accomplishing a level of self-sufficiency and a level of sustainability. If you can get your homestead to accomplish that, you're functioning as a homestead. Before that, it's just a home. It's just land, or it's a place where you live and park your car and mow your grass. Once you start doing things that will attach your homestead to a level of self-sufficiency and sustainability, it starts becoming a homestead. And the more you do to connect the homestead, the place where you live, your home, it becomes more self-sufficient and more sustainable. So you actually start developing these spokes going out, okay, and it's going to give stability to your homestead, and you're going to become more sustainable and more self-sufficient the more things you can do. Now, one might think, well, the ultimate goal is to do everything. Well, the reality is not every homesteader can do everything. We all have our limitations, and some of those limitations are this: time, knowledge, and skills. Knowledge, of course, you can learn to do anything. Skills, you can develop skills for anything. There are things we're more knowledgeable about, we have a better grasp on, and there are skills that we just naturally do better. There's things there's things I do very well, and there's things I'm pretty poor at. But now time is something we all have the exact same amount of time. We all have 168 hours a week. Now, how we divvy that time up. Now you say, well, I don't have that much because I sleep and I eat and I work a day job. And that's true. I do all those things too. So yeah, you have to consider that in your time that you have between that. So I think that area between the homestead and the outer ring, between the hub and the rim, are time, knowledge, and skills. That's what you're going to fill in that spot with what you're doing. You'll see where I'm going with this as we go, because I'm going to actually take each one of these spokes and we're going to talk about the what I feel like are the basics, those first things, those beginner things that you could start doing, skills you can start developing to turn your home into a homestead. And if anybody has any thing they're going to add to this later, feel free to do that. Anything you think should be in there. I think this can be different for different people. It depends on a couple things. What are your desires or your passions? What do you want to do? What are you good at? I mean, these are going to be some different things. So, well, you'll just see as we go through it, but not everybody's going to do the exact same things. But I think you definitely got to have a few things going to really make that connection between a homestead and being self-sufficient and being sustainable. Let's just start right off with what I think is the most obvious one, and that's gardening. And you see it can make a spoke here in our rim, and it connects us to being self-sufficient and sustainable. The homestead becomes a little bit more of those two things by doing gardening. I think gardening is, it's when I think of a homesteader, it's the first thing that pops into my mind. You're growing some food, and I think that's important. I think we need to do that. Now, what you're going to grow could be very different. You could be growing herbs, you can be growing vegetables, you can grow an orchard. There's different things you can do or you can do all of the above. But gardening, I think, is a main spoke of homesteading. It's not. I don't think it's an absolute requirement, but I think it's important. You could buy your vegetables at a farmer's market and be doing 20 other things that are sustainable and self-sufficient and be a homesteader. But I think it's one of those first things you want to develop and try to learn, and it's a skill. I think gardening is a skill. I mean, you hear the term brown thumb, green thumb. I don't think it's something you're born with necessarily. I think it's a skill that you can develop, and anybody can have a green thumb with enough practice and knowledge. It just takes a little application. It takes getting out there in the garden and doing it. So I think that makes a great first spoke, and you see we've got that first connection, but understand this, that one connection, you got a pretty wobbly wheel, don't you? I mean, you really need more than just one thing, going to be considered a homestead, I believe, because gardening by itself makes you a gardener, not necessarily a homesteader, because not every gardener is a homesteader. They're supplying a lot of what they need perhaps, but not everything. So I think it's important that you add more spokes to that rim. I think another one is animal husbandry. So having livestock is important. It's not a necessary thing. On the podcast once, I had a lady who was a vegan. She didn't raise, when she did raise livestock though, she had chickens. So I mean, it doesn't mean that you can't have livestock just because you don't eat the animals. But I think chickens are a great gateway animal. They're a great one to start with. Rabbits, quail, goats, pigs, even cows. I mean, if you have enough land, cows can be a pretty easy livestock to raise if you have enough land for them. So not just because they're large doesn't make them any more difficult than the others. As a matter of fact, there can be a lot of care that goes into the others. They just take up a lot less space. That's all. But livestock is another great spoke to start out with. And any one of those animals, if you start with chicken, there is 1,000 things to learn about chickens. But I'm going to tell you right now, the best way to learn about chickens is to get some chickens. Best way to learn about rabbits is to jump right in and get some rabbits. Yeah, you can do some reading. You can do a little bit of research before you jump in. But I'm telling you, you're never going to learn from a book what you can learn from raising them. Any animal that I've ever raised, we just started. I did a little bit of research, got them, and went at it. And yeah, you make some mistakes. You may even have some losses at times. You try to minimize that. You don't want to do anything that's going to be harmful to the animals or anything like that. You try to minimize that as much as you can. But in the end, to learn, you got to do. You just can't learn everything you want to learn from a book or from blog posts or even something like this. This community is great. We can benefit and we can look to each other for answers. But in the end, just getting out there and doing it's going to be the best teacher. So it's important. What else can you do besides those two things? How about preserving your food? I mean, if you're going to garden and you're going to raise livestock, you're going to have some food. That's why you're doing it. You're connecting to self-sufficiency and sustainability. And when you do that, you need to preserve that food, or else you're going to eat it when it's done. And then what else are you going to do? So what does preserving food consist of? Well, I mean, I think one of the first things you think of is canning. And I think a great place to start is with water bath canning. Water bath canning is really about the simplest thing. It was the first thing I started with. It's just a big pot and some heat and cans, and you just got to pay attention to times and whatnot. You do jellies. You can pickle anything. Salsas. I mean, there's a few things you can do with water bath canning. But then you can move on to pressure canning, and then that's where you start getting into being able to do just about anything. Putting up whole meal foods, making soups and stews and things, and even canning those. Go ahead and basically pre-made meals almost in a jar. So those are two things that are great to learn. Something that people just don't talk about enough is just blanching and freezing. A lot of vegetables, you can just blanch them and freeze them, and they will maintain, and you can learn. There's a little bit of a process to blanching. I mean, you bring it to a temperature, you basically flash cool it by dipping it in some ice water and cooling it really fast, and then freezing it to maintain that texture. Because sometimes if you overcook it, it won't, the textures and it just won't hold its I guess texture, or it'll just taste a little different if you overcook it and then try to freeze it. But there's some things you can freeze raw just fine. But a lot of things require or are better if you blanch them and freeze them. Corn's one of those things. I think green beans Definitely one of those things. So there's a few things that taste better if you blanch them and freeze them. Dehydrating is a great skill to have. Get a dehydrator and start dehydrating some of your food. That's a great way to do things. Fermenting is a very good way and healthy way. It's really good for your gut to make a lot of fermented things, and you can do a lot of things fermented. Pickles, beans. I don't know. There's just make your own sauerkraut. Something I've even gotten into is making drinks like kombucha, which is a fermented drink. So these are great things to learn how to do. Absolutely great homesteading skills to have. Even cold smoking is something a lot of people practice. Not something I do, but it's a way to preserve food. So these are all practices for preserving food. One of the most overlooked, I think it's probably the most overlooked homesteading skill to develop, and one of the most valuable homesteading skills is cooking from scratch. I think this is a valuable spoke in the wheel. It doesn't do you a lot of good to garden, raise livestock, and preserve it if you don't know what to do with it after that. I think cooking from scratch is one of the most valuable skills you can have as a homesteader. And it's not something... it's literally something you can learn anywhere, and it's going to increase your health. It's going to make it so you can use your food in a way that, again, healthier for you and tastier for you. Learning to cook from scratch is just an extremely important skill to have. So I think that those four are really good places to start. And you see that these spokes can just, boom, they just start branching out, and you can start adding to your skills. Of course, depending on the amount of time that you have. However many spokes you're going to have depends on how much time you're going to have. How many things, how many skills, and how much knowledge can you develop in different areas? Well, you can do a lot. You can absolutely do a lot, but there is going to be a limit. But I think that you can branch out and get into a whole bunch of things. And I think there's some other things that come in right behind these. And here's a few I've just named. Composting, very important. I personally think every homesteader should be starting a compost pile, and you can do this with a hot compost pile, which means you're going to get a good balance of what's called greens and browns, and you're going to keep that stirred up. You might hear my dog barking here in a minute. She just come running through the door. She's going crazy back there. And it's going to build up heat, and it's going to compost really quick. But there's also cold composting. It means just piling, a pile of organic material up and just kind of letting nature do its thing. And it takes a while to break down. You can do vermicomposting. That's using worms to compost a compost pile. So, there's a lot of composting skills there to develop. You see, I also have making your own cleaners, household cleaners on that list. Very great skill to have. It's one of the first things we did was make some laundry soap. I remember we got all the materials you need to make homemade laundry soap and started doing that. You can make actual bath soaps. You can make non-toxic household cleaners like window cleaner and furniture polish and things like that, counter cleaners. Make your own lotions, make your own shampoos. Sky's the limit there. Anything that you can buy to use in your house, make your own deodorants, toothpaste. You can make it. There are recipes to make it in a non-toxic way. And those are great skills to develop and going to bring a lot of health into your house as well. You see, I also have on that spoke Herbal Remedies. I think getting started with Herbal Remedies is pretty awesome. I think you should start with something simple like maybe dandelion, plantain, perhaps comfrey. Elderberry. These are all things that you can find pretty easy, and you can make a lot of herbal remedies starting out with the simplest of things. I would start with things that don't have the potential of being dangerous, like those things I just mentioned. Elderberry, there's some questions about that. It can be a little toxic in great amounts, so you have to be careful with all that. But an elderberry syrup, a lot of people say it's one of the better cough medicines you'll get. So, I think it's absolutely something that be beneficial. You also see I have on another spoke, bushcrafting. This is hunting, fishing, foraging, outdoor survival skills. I think these are important things to learn. Not for everybody, but it could be a spoke in your wheel that connects your homestead to being self-sufficient and sustainable. So I think learning bushcrafting skills is really, really important. So all those spokes, again, you're becoming more sustainable, more self-sufficient. The more smokes you connect to those things, to your homestead, the more stable your homestead becomes. So it's really important to build some skills, to gain some knowledge, fill that time in with things that you can develop in skills. But you see all that green area left? The sky's the limit. What are you interested in? I mean, maybe you could think of 100 things to put in there. Again, you're limited by your time. We all do have our limits. It's just the reality of it. There is a limitation to that. It'd be irresponsible for me to tell you, make this grand statement to say you can do everything you want to do. But the reality is you have that limitation of time. But you can see you can practice preparedness, which you will as a homesteader. If you're preserving your food, you're practicing a level of preparedness, okay? You're putting up canned foods and foods in your freezer. That's preparedness, but you can take that so much further. You can be looking at tanning hides and doing leather work with those hides. Water collection, which is something you'll probably get into, collecting rainwater off of a roof or just in barrels out in your yard, using your garden. You might be one that practices needlework, crocheting, knitting, sewing. Very great skills to have. I've actually talked to my daughter about learning to crochet because she actually taught herself on YouTube how to crochet. I mean, it was nothing none of us knew how to do. She's never raised to do it. My wife doesn't do it. Yet my daughter taught herself to do it by watching YouTube videos. So I'm like, hey, you want to show me how to do that? Because, hey, I'm not too proud to learn how to do that. I'd love to learn how to do it. You also see I have on there alternate energy, getting into dealing with solar panels and things like that, or maybe even alternate heat sources. Burning wood and learning about that, or building maybe a outdoor smoker. There's just all these things you can do. Carpentry, blacksmithing. Sky is the limit. I could have put 100 things in the green area. What is your thing? What are you passionate about? What do you see that just gets you going and makes you go, man, I'd love to get into that? Because the sky's the limit. You want to fill that area in with as many spokes as you can according to the limitations of time. Something you don't enjoy, maybe you want to get rid of it. You don't feel like it's that important of an aspect of your homestead. It's not doing a lot to make you more self-sufficient or sustainable, or not as, or maybe just not as much as something else would. Get rid of it if you don't enjoy doing it. There's not anything that says you have to do these things to be a homesteader. But you do have to do some things that connect you to sustainability and self-sufficiency, I believe. You have to be